I was taking a look at some of this tariff stuff, and correct me if I'm wrong, but these tariffs make no sense. This is the White House's fact sheet that they put out about the tariffs. And now this is the most updated version of the fact sheet, even though this isn't the most updated set of facts because Donald Trump has delayed the tariffs due to agreements that he's made with Mexico and Canada. But I just think it's so strange. So it says, addressing an emergency situation. The extraordinary threat posed by illegal aliens and drugs, including deadly fentanyl, constitutes a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So they're saying that the threat posed by illegal aliens and drugs is making the national emergency. But then all of the things that they're talking about to justify the tariffs is economic. So it says, until the crisis is alleviated, President DJT is implementing a 25% additional tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico and a 10% additional tariff on imports from China. Energy resources from Canada will have a lower 10% tariff. President Trump is taking bold action to hold Mexico, Canada, and China accountable to their promises of halting illegal immigration and stopping poisonous fentanyl and other drugs from flowing into our country. The orders make clear that the flow of contraband drugs like fentanyl to the United States through illicit distribution networks has created a national emergency, including a public health crisis. So then it says, using our leverage to ensure Americans' safety, previous administrations failed to fully leverage America's economic position as a tool to secure our borders against illegal immigration or illegal migration and combat the scourge of fentanyl, preferring to let problems fester. Access to the American market is a privilege. The United States is one of the most open economies in the world and the lowest average tariff rates in the world. While trade accounts for 67% of Canada's GDP, 73% of Mexico's GDP, and 37% of China's GDP, it accounts for only 24% of US GDP. However, in 2023, the US trade deficit in goods was the largest at over $1 trillion. So they're acting like this is a bad thing, that trade is only 24% of US GDP, but they do realize that tariffs will drive this number down, right? Because when we're talking about trade as a percentage of GDP, that is the total amount of imports and exports. And obviously, if you enact tariffs, both imports and exports are going to decrease. Tariffs are a powerful, proven source of leverage for protecting the national interest. Well, not really the national interest. It's very specific in terms of what you are trying. You're trying to ice out a market, and you're trying to beef up a domestic market. Beef up domestic industry to try to give them a boost up, give your domestic production a leg up on the foreign production. President Trump is using the tools at hand and taking decisive action that puts American safety and our national security first. So this is just ridiculous when we're talking about illegal migration or the amount of drugs carried in through borders. Tariffs isn't going to do anything on that. Even protecting the border and closing down the border, that's not going to have any effect on that. Once again, the majority of drugs are carried into the country through legal forms of crossing the border. It's carried in a lot of the time by American citizens that are just getting it from cartels throughout the world. Joe Biden actually had a huge impact on the drug flow throughout the entire world by targeting the source of drugs like fentanyl in just like areas where it was being produced. And simply because he was targeting the production of the drugs, the supply of the drugs flowing into the country was dramatically decreased. And that's why we're at some of the, underneath Joe Biden's presidency and as a direct result of his efforts, the amount of drug overdoses went down for the first time in like 12 years. So we're using basically economic coercion to get 10,000 National Guard from Mexico to the southern border? This doesn't make any sense. Like, they're literally saying that this is a threat to try to get our partners to secure our borders and combat fentanyl. And so you are threatening them instead of actually working with them. So on its face, this doesn't make any sense at all. He's keeping his promise to stop the flood of illegal aliens and drugs. When voters overwhelmingly elected, it wasn't an oh my God, it was not overwhelming. He won by 1.5%, and 3.5 million votes for Kamala Harris were thrown out. So Kamala Harris actually should have won the popular vote and arguably won the actual election. in the Electoral College. The Biden administration's policies have fueled the worst border crisis in U.S. history. That doesn't make any sense. Like, Joe Biden deported way more people than Trump deported while he was in president. In Trump's last term, Biden deported way more as a raw number and a percentage than Trump did. Also, border crossings were at a low. Like, when Biden left office, they were at a low. More than 10 million illegal aliens attempted to enter the U.S. under Biden's leadership, including a rising number of Chinese nationals and people on the watch list. What the So we're just being racist now, including a rising number of Chinese. The problem is not confined to the southern border. Encounters at the northern border with Canada are rising as well. Gang members, smugglers, human traffickers, and illegal drugs and narcotics of all kinds are pouring across our borders and into our communities. Custom and Border Protection apprehended more than 21,000 pounds of fentanyl at our borders. Enough fentanyl to kill more than 4 billion people. I love that. Enough to kill more than 4 billion people. It is we don't even have 4 billion people in the country. So how could it kill 4 billion? This just doesn't make any. Okay. It is estimated. It is estimated that federal officials are only able to seize a fraction of the fentanyl smuggled across. Yes, that's because they're smuggled through legal ports of entry. These drugs kill tens of thousands of Americans each year, including 75,000 deaths per year attributed to fentanyl alone. Okay. Donald Trump oversaw the opioid epidemic as well, and he didn't do anything about it. Building on past success, President Trump continues to demonstrate his commitment to ensuring U.S. trade policy serves the national interest. As President Trump said in the presidential memorandum on American First trade policy is a critical component in national security. He's signed all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the U.S., and it's a ridiculous open borders. I don't understand what people mean when they say open borders. I really don't. I don't understand what people mean when they say our borders are open or we need to close the borders. There's not a door that we can just shut and now the border's closed. President Trump also has a long record of putting American first on trade. In his first term, President Trump successfully used threats of tariffs on Mexico to help secure a border. Once again, this doesn't make any sense. Putting America first on trade is using threats of tariffs to help secure a border? You're basically saying we're using threats of tanking our trade relationships for something completely unrelated to trade. When our national security was threatened by a global oversupply in steel and aluminum, President Trump took swift action to protect America's national security by implementing tariffs on imports of these goods. Now, U.S. Steel is trying to merge with Nippon Steel? In response to China's IP theft, forced technology transfer, and other unreasonable behavior, President Trump acted with conviction to impose tariffs on imports from China, using that leverage to reach a historic bilateral economic agreement. Just last week, President Trump leveraged tariffs to successfully resolve national security concerns with Colombia. Again, this is completely insane. Why are they trying to pretend like this has anything to do with trade when they're just saying President Trump is using the threat of tariffs to achieve meaningless, personal wins over these presidents of different countries? It makes no sense at all. Suffice to say, it's not good news, okay? Honestly, some of the best news of the news cycle this past week has been the fact that Donald Trump rescinded on the tariffs and he's just been using it as threats. And I think Kyle Kalinske has been doing a great job of covering this. There is the theory that he has been floating out there that basically Donald Trump and his insider trading oligarchy buddies just shorted the stocks of the U.S. stock market. And then when they tanked, they made billions of dollars. And then Donald Trump is like, actually, we'll be postponing the tariffs on 30 days. And then the stock market goes back. So, there's that theory that really is the only thing that makes sense. I don't even know what concessions Donald Trump got from Canada. There was a let me see. Canada tariff Trump. Trump made something snap in us. U.S.-Canada ties frayed by tariff row. Alright, let's read this. Some tariff concessions from Canada and Mexico touted by Trump lack substance, experts say. Yeah, no. Okay. Let's read what NBC News has to say. President Donald Trump and his supporters have heralded his use of tariff threats to exact concessions on drug trafficking and border security from Canada and Mexico. Yet experts say some of the measures agreed to by America's two largest trading partners and close allies are less substantial than what has been trumpeted. Trump announced a 25% tariffs on the two countries Saturday with the expectation they would take effect Tuesday. By Monday, he said that he had reached an agreement with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum to deploy 10,000 of her country's National Guard officers to the U.S. border to stem the flow of migrants and drugs into into the U.S. Sheinbaum said she had agreed to establish a bilateral working group with the Trump administration that would tackle security, migration, and trade. That's the thing that came out where people were talking about, oh, Donald Trump got all of these concessions from Mexico. But what he didn't mention is that Claudia Sheinbaum was in Mexico telling her people that we got concessions from the United States to say that they're going to work to crack down on gun trafficking into the U.S. The same day, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that he had agreed to beef up border and drug enforcement, as well as appoint a new fentanyl czar and designate cartels as organizations. So that's what he got from Canada. Jesus Christ, Trump is an embarrassing president. Kamala Harris was right about one thing, and that's when she was in the debate stage with Trump and said that world leaders laugh at Donald Trump. Like, he is such a blustering buffoon. Okay, so this is where it gets dark. So we can laugh about the tariff thing, but Donald Trump's plan to take over Gaza it really is a mask-off moment for American imperialism. And I think that this is something that we can really talk about in a lot of aspects of Donald Trump's presidency. When we take a look at some of the actions that he's doing, and we see that he wants to take over Palestine, we see that he is a completely corrupt politician, and he's using tariffs to basically have personal beefs with our allies and neighbors, and that he also wants to pull out of the United Nations Human Rights Council because we just don't believe in human rights anymore. That's like, oh my God, this is so bad. But then we take a look at some of what other Republican politicians have been doing. We take a look at some of what other Democratic politicians have been doing. And we see that he's not that far in terms of a departure of the norm, in terms of American imperialism. I think that what we can say is that when it comes to Donald Trump ripping apart the regulatory state, he is by far on a completely another level than any other politician, even Republican politicians. Before Donald Trump, Republican politicians were all in favor of having like not a strong regulatory state, but not completely ripping apart the federal government altogether and selling it for scraps. Joe Biden, he did a pretty good job of empowering regulatory agencies by empowering the NLRB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, helping labor. He did a good job in that, actually also protecting different areas of just nature reserves from getting developed. Joe Biden did a good job of actually like trying to rein in corporations. Was it enough? I don't think it's by far nearly enough, but he did a better job than Obama. He did a better job than Donald Trump in that regard. Donald Trump comes in and he just completely blows the top off of it. So there's a significant difference there. But when we're talking about that Donald Trump is basically supporting, there's not a significant departure from what Joe Biden was doing. When we're talking about how he's ignoring international law, that's not a significant departure than what Joe Biden was doing. Joe Biden was also ignoring international law in regards to Israel and Palestine. And also, like, when we're talking about like Donald Trump using unilateral power to enact his will on the world, that's also not a huge significant departure from what Joe Biden was doing. Just like, we have to remember that Joe Biden did pretty much like bomb Yemen without the consent of Congress. That was a big scandal. Donald Trump, like, of course, is on another level when we're talking about the amount of violence that he's willing to use on the world. But that being said, it's not a departure from the path we were on underneath Joe Biden and the Democrats' control. It's the same with American imperialism. Joe Biden had the same idea where America needs to be involved in everything. You can definitely see that with Ukraine. Now, I do happen to think that funding Ukraine is justified compared to like funding Israel, but it's still the same thought. It's still the same thought that America needs to be involved in everything. America is kind of the world police. If we are not there, China's going to be there, Russia's going to be there, some imperial power is going to be there. So this isn't a huge departure. However, Donald Trump is doing it way more obviously, way more blatantly, and he's just ripping the mask off of all of these negative structures that have been kind of festering underneath the veneer of respectable liberalism.